Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Alex Tucciarone, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. On behalf of ICCR staff and members, we welcome you to this overview of our 2026 Resolutions and Voting Guide, a publication that presents the full complement of shareholder proposals filed by our members for 2026 proxies. Pulling together this year's proxy book was a massive undertaking, a credit to the rigor of our members and the importance of our collective work. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank my stalwart teammate, Julie Wokaty, for her tremendous work putting this year's proxy book together. For those new to us, ICCR is a coalition of over 300 institutional investors representing more than $4 trillion in assets under management. This year marks ICCR's 55th anniversary. ICCR's membership comprises a wide spectrum of institutional investors, including faith-based organizations, asset management firms, union pension funds, foundations, and other responsible investors. ICCR further launched the Investor Alliance for Human Rights in 2018 to grow the network and build the capacity of investors engaging on business and human rights concerns. Without our partners and allies, our work would not be possible. We thank them today and always. To learn more about us, we invite you to visit our website at iccr.org. We want to especially welcome newcomers today, including representatives from the corporations we engage and any advisory groups and law firms advising companies on key ESG issues, asset managers voting their proxies on shareholder proposals, and other groups in the investment community that may not interact with ICCR members regularly. We are glad you're here, and we hope this webinar is an opportunity to hear new perspectives, and we encourage your participation during the Q&A. As you can see, we have a full agenda today. We have a lot of ground to cover together. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping reminders. You will be in listen-only mode throughout the webinar, and to limit distractions, we will not enable the chat function. After speakers' remarks, we'll open up for a Q&A. We invite you to submit your questions through the question box, should you have any, at the bottom of your screen, and to do so as they come up during the course of the webinar, as opposed to waiting until the very end, in order to get your questions into the queue. When typing in your question, please tell us your name and affiliation, and if you have a preference, which speaker your question should be directed to. Due to the high number of attendees today, we will endeavor to follow up via email to any questions that we can't get to on today's call. I want to remind everyone that this webinar is open to the public, and with us today are members of the press, and all remarks will be on the record. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, along with a link to the proxy guide, will be sent to all registrants this afternoon. Please review our Zoom guidelines, which I'll give you all a minute to read. The most important point is to identify yourself and your affiliation, as we will be checking participants against our registration list. And with that, I'm grateful to turn it over to ICCR CEO, Josh Zinner.
Thanks, Alex. Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much to all of you for attending our annual proxy season webinar. We're really excited to feature the work of ICCR members who are in the trenches daily, engaging with corporations on their environmental and social impacts and on strong governance and accountability. But before we dive into the details of some important member initiatives, I want to take a moment to talk about the broader context that we find ourselves in. We're all well aware of the political pressure against shareholder rights and responsible investing, which has only gotten worse under the current administration. The pressure is, of course, part of a broader assault on any and all sensible guardrails on corporate conduct, including the broad deregulation taking part across the government. The SEC's chair, Paul Atkins, has made clear in multiple speeches about his and the current commission's hostility towards shareholder rights and shareholder proposals. In November, as many of you are well aware, the SEC made a troubling announcement that it was going to refrain from adjudicating no action requests by companies, instead offering to provide a, quote, no objection letter to any company asserting that it has a reasonable basis for exclusion, without any consideration of the proponent response. The agency blamed the government shutdown for this abdication of responsibility, but it was clear based on the SEC leadership's hostility towards shareholder proposals that this was going to be the direction of travel. On top of that, in February, the SEC announced that it would not permit shareholders with less than $5 million in shares in a company to file exempt solicitations supporting their proposals on the EDGAR system, cutting off that wide distribution system to all but the biggest shareholders. I should note, before I go on, that yesterday ICCR along with As You Sow, one of our members, filed a federal lawsuit against the SEC, alleging that the November policy change violated the Federal Administrative Procedure Act. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but we will keep everyone posted on the progress of that lawsuit. And if you have questions, you can direct them to the Q&A at the end. But moving backwards, it's interesting to see how this proxy season has played out after the November announcement. Proponents have definitely continued to file, as you'll hear about in the course of this webinar. And on the bright side, many companies have made the decision to put proposals on the proxy to avoid legal risks and governance risks and other risks of unilaterally omitting. In fact, the majority of proposals that have been filed are going to a vote on company proxies. Other companies have come to the table and negotiated with proponents, enabling the voluntary withdrawal of quite a few proposals. But at the same time, on the flip side, many companies have taken the opposite path and omitted proposals that should have been on the ballot after receiving the no objection letter from the SEC. In response, investors have filed 5 injunctive lawsuits to this point in federal court against issuers who have omitted proposals, and 3 of these cases have already settled. Other investors, including big pension funds, are planning to vote no against directors in response to companies omitting proposals, given the poor corporate governance that this conduct entails. So there's a lot of strong pushback by investors, both to the SEC policy change and by companies that try to take advantage of this policy at the expense of their shareholders. It's worth noting also that the president issued an executive order back in December, mostly around proxy advisory firms, but also directing the SEC chair to, quote, consider revising or rescinding all rules, regulations, guidance, bulletins, and memoranda relating to shareholder proposals, including Rule 14a8, that are inconsistent with the purpose of the order. And the purpose of the order, of course, was to target ESG and DEI in investment strategies. While the executive order is not legally binding, it puts pressure on the SEC to act on Rule 14a8. And in fact, the SEC is planning to do a rulemaking regarding Rule 14a8 as early as this spring. And we're all concerned about what will be proposed given the current antipathy of the administration toward our collective work. Again, on the more positive side, ICCR members have continued to be in dialogue with hundreds of companies over the course of the past year, and many of these dialogues have been productive. Despite the policy challenges, there is still room for meaningful engagement, but of course, as the pressure on shareholder proposals continue, progress that has been achieved is at risk. In short, there's a lot of work to be done. We're continuing to keep moving forward, but also to keep pushing back. If you're not already involved in our movement, we welcome you to join us to support these efforts. We appreciate working collaboratively with so many of you on this call, and I want to give a big thank you to our comms team who organized this webinar, and also to our upcoming panelists as they talk about some exciting new member initiatives. So thank you very much, and I'll put it back over to you, Julie.
Great, thank you, Josh. So good morning, everyone. The ICCR proxy book contains the full text of ICCR member-sponsored resolutions, both as lead and co-filer for 2026 corporate proxies as of February 20th. If you are an investor, we invite you to consider these proposals as you vote your proxies. A link to download the guide will be sent to you following today's webinar. So let me take us through some of the key trends in this year's guide. ICCR members filed 415 resolutions at 327 companies in a range of industries. And broadly speaking, where did ICCR member interest coalesce this year? Corporate governance led the way with 255 proposals. Next came human and worker rights, 34 filings, along with climate change and environmental health, each with 33 proposals. The large number of filings related to governance issues this year is due to new governance-focused members that have joined the ICCR coalition. Filings related to corporate political responsibility were next with 30, followed by health equity with 16, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility with 14. So what outcomes are our resolutions seeing so far? 71% of ICCR member proposals are currently headed to a vote, which is close to the 73% we saw at this time last year. By the time that we finalized our guide, companies had indicated to our members that they intended to exclude 84 of their proposals from proxy ballots, just over 20% of those filed by our members. At this time last year, by contrast, 42% of our members' resolutions had received SEC challenges. Our members have successfully negotiated 33 agreements with companies as of publication time, compared to 21 agreements at this time last year. So let's take a closer look at some of those withdrawals. When companies receive a shareholder proposal, they may reach out to the filers and request dialogue to discuss aspects of the proposal and negotiate. If an agreement between both parties can be reached that satisfies the proposal's main requests, filers may choose to voluntarily withdraw it, in which case the proposal will not appear on the company's proxy statement or go to a vote of all shareholders. Proposals currently in negotiations are not identified in our guide this year. Each year, our members negotiate many such agreements with companies. By the end of last proxy season, our members had secured 66 commitments on a range of issues. To date, our members have reached 33 agreements with their portfolio companies. These agreements include Aramark on living wage, Bank of America on deforestation, Cheniere on political spending, CVS on cybersecurity defenses, Equifax on agentic AI, and Whirlpool on right to repair. Additional withdrawals will be reported this summer in our proxy season roundup, Catalyzing Corporate Change. Organizations arguing that ESG considerations are irrelevant to business have been filing shareholder resolutions for some time, though there has been an increase in recent years. There are several themes featured in anti-ESG proposals. Some argue that corporate efforts to reduce discrimination are discriminatory against white men, and threaded through these anti-diversity proposals is a strong animus towards queer people in general and transgender folk in particular. Another group of proposals in this category question climate science and seek to end corporate action to mitigate climate impacts, arguing that such efforts are futile and/or too costly. As of mid-March, we were tracking 80 proposals filed by anti-ESG proponents, either sourced from the proponents' own websites or the media, or through no objection notices posted on the SEC's website. This is an increase over the 57 proposals we saw this time last year. And I think that we can expect to see more before the season ends. The majority of this year's anti-ESG proposals target businesses that seek to create safe, tolerant, diverse, and inclusive workplaces for all their employees. Particularly targeted are those corporations that have signed on to the Human Rights Campaign's Business Coalition for Equality Act. Another significant chunk of proposals target, of course, climate action to mitigate the climate crisis. Companies receiving anti-ESG resolutions include AbbVie, Costco, CVS, Deere, McDonald's, Meta, Disney, Walmart, and many others. However, I would say it is important to note that the degree of low support that these proposals generally receive each proxy season. In recent years, they have averaged between 1.5 and 2%. As you can see here, the most active anti-ESG proponents are chiefly the National Legal and Policy Center, the National Center for Public Policy Research, and Value Research. I would also mention that Inspire Investing has also notably increased its filing activity from 7 known proposals in 2025 to 38 planned for 2026. And now we're going to move on to our guest speakers. First up is Laura Krausa, System Director of Advocacy Programs for CommonSpirit Health. Laura, take it away.
Thank you, Julie. Can you hear me? All right. I am really delighted to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm Laura Krausa. I'm with CommonSpirit Health. We are a large Catholic not-for-profit health system with over 2,200 care sites across 24 states. CommonSpirit recently led shareholder proposals with 3 major food and beverage manufacturers, calling for greater transparency around the practices in place to assess and manage risks regarding chemicals and additives in their products. Investors see significant legal, financial, and reputational risks for companies ill-prepared to address consumer, legislative, and regulatory concerns. 2 companies receiving this proposal, PepsiCo and Mondelez, made important transparency commitments, in exchange for which investors withdrew their proposals. Coca-Cola chose not to engage with us, and our proposal is on their proxy. Companies use additives and chemicals in foods and beverages for many reasons, including to color, flavor, sweeten, preserve, or even process their products. Now, often these additives serve little purpose, and ingredients that would They are ingredients that would not normally be consumed as a food in and of themselves, and they're often not present in unprocessed or minimally processed foods. And many of these chemicals and additives pose risks to health. Given the current regulatory, legislative, and legal landscapes, the proposals are timely. In April 2025, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, moved to revoke authorization for 2 synthetic petroleum-based food dyes, and then urged the entire food and beverage industry to voluntarily eliminate the 6 remaining synthetic dyes still in use. Many companies complied and set time-bound targets tracked on the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA's, website. Coca-Cola was not among them. HHS has simultaneously directed the FDA to explore revision of the rule that currently allows companies to self-affirm the safety of their food ingredients, thereby bypassing FDA review. The generally recognized as safe or GROS loophole has allowed 111 chemicals of unknown safety into the U.S. food supply chain. That's according to a recent Environmental Working Group study. Legislation has also been introduced in 28 states regarding chemicals and additives, with 20 bills enacted and another 155 introduced. So companies will be required to comply with state laws, and they should be prepared to make global changes in their ingredient formularies. And lawsuits are being filed, including one in 2025 by the city of San Francisco, which accused 10 food and beverage companies of engineering a public health crisis from their ultra-processed foods and putting profit over people. Also in May 2025, a commission involving health policy experts in the federal government released a report that directly tied food additives and chemicals to chronic illnesses in children, including tumors, hormone imbalances, behavioral issues, obesity, diabetes, and even in utero harms for a developing fetus. So it's clear that government is quite serious about chemicals and additives in our food. At the same time, consumer awareness around these issues is growing rapidly. Advocacy groups are calling for greater transparency and safer products. And in fact, a Pew Research poll found that more than 70% of U.S. adults are concerned about exposure to harmful chemicals in food and drinking water. In fact, roughly 5 out of 6 respondents said they want both government and businesses to do more to ensure chemical safety and improve transparency. PepsiCo and Mondelez certainly understand the shifting landscape. And although they did file no action requests on our proposal, they ultimately chose to remain in active dialogue and work to find agreement. Their no action argument was that they would substantially implement the proposal's request and within a few weeks' time. So, concerned about the feasibility of undisclosed future implementation, investors recommended a more deliberate and longer-term strategy. PepsiCo and Mondelez ultimately understand the evolving food landscape, and they made commitments. Investors remain concerned that Coca-Cola has opted not to engage. Now, all of this is happening within a rapidly evolving food landscape. Companies that are not prepared to adapt to new legislative and regulatory requirements and shifting consumer preferences may struggle to respond quickly enough, particularly when recipe reformulation is required. The companies tell us themselves that these ingredient changes require substantial time in order to maintain brand name product consistency. Companies without policies and processes in place risk finding themselves in the crosshairs of a consumer base that expects better and a government willing to take steps to demand safer products. Thank you.
Next up, we're going to hear from Katie Carter, who's going to talk about data center energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Alex. This year, we worked with You Sow to file a resolution asking Meta to issue a report explaining how it will meet their climate change-related commitments on greenhouse gas emissions, given the growing energy demand from its artificial intelligence and planned data centers. NorthStar Asset Management filed a similar proposal at Alphabet. The technology sector is an increasingly important source of greenhouse gas emissions, and its contribution is expanding dramatically as a result of artificial intelligence and data centers. Despite the promise of AI to unlock efficiencies and unparalleled innovation, data centers that power AI are highly energy intensive. The computations required for AI involve graphic processing units that use approximately 4 times the power of ordinary server applications. The extent to which the expansion in electricity demand stemming from AI will translate into higher GHG emissions depends on the fuel used to electrify the data centers, which does vary by location. Powering expanded data center operations requires significant amounts of electricity, and U.S. utilities are responding by backtracking on their climate commitments, expanding fossil fuel infrastructure, and delaying coal plant closures. As a result, Meta's operations are becoming increasingly reliant on high carbon power, driving higher emissions and exposing the company to growing climate and regulatory risk. Already, Meta's direct emissions from its data center energy use have risen 223% since 2019, and Alphabet's total emissions have increased by 51% since 2019. Although both companies are working to add renewable capacity and develop clean energy, their data center energy consumption is growing even faster, and investors need more information and disclosures about how the companies are managing these risks. Both companies publicly understand the importance of addressing climate change and have set climate-related emission reduction goals. Meta notes on its website that climate change is the greatest threat we all face, and the need to act grows more urgent every day. The science is clear and unambiguous. As world leaders, advocates, environmental groups, and others meet, we want to see bold action agreed to with the strongest possible commitments to achieve net zero targets that help limit warming to 1.5 degrees. But again, Meta's astronomical 223% rise in direct emissions from data center energy use since 2019 is unambiguously counter to strong public climate commitments. Therefore, investors are concerned about the company's ability to meet its 2030 net zero commitment. Meta's long-term value may be at risk if the company cannot secure sufficient clean energy to support its growth trajectory and avoid mounting pressures associated with bringing more fossil fuel-based energy to local communities. These factors also represent portfolio-level risks for long-term investors like Peace U.S.A. and likely most of the investors on this call. Over time, portfolio performance is influenced chiefly by the performance of the economy itself. But social and environmental costs created by companies can drag on the economy and directly reduce portfolio returns long term. Climate change is one of these threats to the greater economy. For example, research shows that the impact of excess carbon emissions on the global economy may reduce the compound annual returns of an average portfolio by 30% over the next 40 years. There are factors to consider at the local level as well. These data centers require so much power that they can impact the energy costs and reliability of local neighborhoods connected to the same grids. This creates an equitability and affordability issue on top of the climate risk. Companies like Meta and Alphabet that are pushing an AI future backed by building data centers need to pursue options that reduce their potential impacts on the environment as well as the neighborhoods where they operate. This includes the commitments and action they set for themselves, as well as the deals they negotiate with local utilities and the legislative policies they support. We hope you will consider supporting these proposals, asking Meta and Alphabet how they will meet their climate change-related commitments, given growing energy demand from AI and data centers. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And next, we're going to hear from Kelly Poole from As You Sow. Over to you, Kelly.
Great, thank you. Hello, I'm Kelly Poole, a member of As You Sow's climate and energy team. I'm going to continue on the theme of the AI boom and the impact that data centers are having on the power grid, among other environmental and social impacts. A concerning impact of the AI boom is that electricity demand projections for data centers are highly speculative. In an effort to find the best deals on power procurement, tech companies are shopping around at multiple utilities, and consequentially, power utilities are overbuilding infrastructure based on inflated demand projections. A compounding concern is that utilities are investing in new gas plants to power data centers. Last year, the U.S. nearly tripled its gas-fired capacity in development. If all in-development plants are built, the U.S.'s existing gas fleet would grow by nearly 50%. Southern Company is part of this trend. planning to build 5 new gas units in Georgia. Meanwhile, we are already seeing data center contracts being withdrawn from utility interconnection queues. If projected demand fails to materialize or contracts underperform, shareholders and customers could be exposed to stranded or underutilized assets unless strong protections are in place. And this is especially concerning for gas plants, which have 40-year asset lives. So investors are seeking assurance that Southern, like its peers, has policies in place requiring that large load customers bear the full financial responsibility for the infrastructure required to serve them. To this end, As You Sow and Mercy Investments filed a proposal requesting that Southern issue a report disclosing if and how it is putting safeguards in place to avoid shifting costs of new infrastructure for data centers to residential customers and small businesses. This issue is material because there is currently an affordability crisis across the U.S., especially when it comes to power bills. This is specifically the case in Georgia, where Southern's largest power utility is. Georgia ranks 35th in the U.S. for energy burden. Georgia Power disconnected customers for non-payment over 180,000 times in 2024. More than 20% increase from the same period in 2023. And while Southern Company currently has rate freezes in place for Georgia Power and Alabama Power, this will only delay cost increases. Its current plan is going to cost customers an estimated $50 to $60 billion over the life of the planned resources. So far, rising bills are already driving legislative scrutiny and growing community opposition. Affordability was the defining issue of the recent Public Utility Commission election in Georgia, and this is expected to be an area of growing regulatory focus, potentially making it difficult for Southern to get future expenditures approved by the Utility Commission. There is a clear list of solutions to the affordability concerns. The most common solution is a large load tariff, which requires financial accountability from customers requesting a certain amount of electricity. There are a growing number of peers that have worked with regulators to put these large load tariffs in place. Examples include Dominion Energy and AEP. We at As You Sow will be distributing an exempt solicitation further describing this proposal and why it will benefit Southern Company and its shareholders. In the meantime, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And next up is Madison Krieger from NorthStar. Madison?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Madison Krieger, and I am the Activism and Impact Research Analyst at NorthStar Asset Management in Boston. NorthStar is a socially responsible asset manager that has been engaging companies for over 30 years on issues across our 6-pillar framework. During that time, we have filed more than 300 shareholder proposals and are proud members of ICCR. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about our AI-related proposal at Salesforce. This year, NorthStar filed a proposal asking Salesforce to evaluate whether the development, deployment, and marketing of its AI technologies align with the company's stated human rights commitments and ethical use policies. Specifically, we requested a report assessing potential risks from misalignment and describing the board-level processes used to identify and address AI-related human rights risks on an ongoing basis. This proposal emerged from a broader shift we're seeing across the tech sector. As an asset manager with a concentrated global equity portfolio, we have historically screened out traditional sin stocks, including defense companies and weapons manufacturers. But technological innovation, especially the rapid development of artificial intelligence, is beginning to blur those boundaries. AI systems are now being integrated into defense, surveillance, immigration enforcement, and other high-risk contexts. As a result, tech companies that were not historically considered part of the defense sector may now have indirect exposure through the downstream use of their products. For investors, this raises new questions about exposure to human rights risks that may not be visible through traditional sector classifications. Companies may also lack the governance frameworks and oversight mechanisms needed to identify, monitor, and manage how their technologies are ultimately used. This proposal was filed at a particularly pivotal moment. Shortly after we filed, Salesforce announced a $5.6 billion contract with the U.S. Army. We are also watching in real time the tensions that can arise when companies do not fully anticipate the societal and human rights implications of deploying advanced AI technologies. Ongoing debates involving companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and their relationships with the U.S. government show just how quickly these issues are evolving. These developments highlight why investors need greater clarity about how companies evaluate and manage the downstream impacts of their technologies. Salesforce has taken some steps to articulate principles around responsible AI development. The company published its Trusted AI and Agents Impact Report in 2025, which outlines high-level design principles and governance structures related to AI. While we appreciate those efforts, we believe the report does not go far enough to address key governance questions. For example, the report does not explain how Salesforce conducts due diligence on high-risk customers. It does not describe what escalation triggers require review by senior leadership or the board when potential human rights risks arise. It does not clarify whether Salesforce monitors how its technologies are used after deployment, or under what circumstances the company may suspend or terminate customers whose use of the technology may lead to human rights harms. These are not hypothetical concerns. Tech companies have already faced significant controversies related to how their platforms are used by customers. In Salesforce's case, the company is currently defending litigation related to its past relationship with Backpage, where plaintiffs allege Salesforce provided software and consulting services despite widespread reporting that the platform was associated with sex trafficking. Regardless of the outcome, the case highlights the legal and reputational risks that can arise when companies lack clear processes for identifying and escalating high-risk customer relationships. Additionally, Salesforce faced internal and external scrutiny in 2018 regarding its contract with U.S. Customs and Border Protection during implementation of the federal government's zero-tolerance immigration policy. More than 650 Salesforce employees raised concerns about the company's role in providing software infrastructure to the agency during a period when family separation policies were widely criticized. While Salesforce maintained its tools were used for administrative purposes, this illustrates how downstream use of enterprise technology can create significant human rights and reputational risks. Human rights risks often arise not only from how technologies are designed, but from how they are deployed in the real world. As AI systems become more powerful and are integrated into sensitive sectors like defense, public safety, and government operations, the need for transparency around these governance processes become even more critical. After several engagements with the company, we did not reach terms for a withdrawal. This week, we received the company's opposition statement, and the proposal will be on the proxy this year. As AI becomes a foundational layer of global infrastructure, the stakes will only increase. Shareholder proposals like this one are an important tool for ensuring that transparency, accountability, and human rights considerations keep pace with technological innovation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madison. And now we're going to hear from Maxwell Homans.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, I'm Maxwell Homans, Shareholder Advocacy Manager at Mercy Investment Services, and I'll be continuing on the topic of immigration. We are a ministry of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas, women religious who have set out critical concerns that guide our work and investment decisions, including immigration and anti-racism. We represent our own assets and advocacy on behalf of our partners. Led by our partner, the Jesuit Committee on Investment Responsibility, this year Mercy co-filed a proposal requesting that the private prison company GEO Group hire a third party to determine whether they are complicit in violating international human rights law by providing transportation and security services to assist ICE deportations. The Jesuits' work in shareholder advocacy is grounded not only in responsibilities as investors, but also in the Catholic Jesuit tradition that calls us to promote justice and uphold the dignity of every person. Rooted in Ignatian values, especially the commitment to cura personalis, care for the whole person, and a faith that does justice, the Jesuits believe that economic activity and corporate conduct must respect the inherent dignity and rights of all people, including inmates and detainees. Through Mercy's shareholder advocacy ministry, Mercy Investment Services has long engaged private prison companies, such as GEO Group, on their care for incarcerated people. As ICE has ramped up its enforcement against migrants, GEO has stepped into a large role in immigration detention. GEO now owns and assists in the operation of over 20 detention centers, primarily holding migrants as civil detainees, with the company facing multiple lawsuits over inhumane conditions. In addition, GEO's wholly owned subsidiary, GEO Transport, is the largest provider of transportation for ICE and has been contracted to provide security on board ICE deportation flights. Our proposal's concerns arose from documentation by human rights organizations indicating that detainees may have been transported to countries where they could face persecution or serious harm. During one of our dialogues with GEO, their executives admitted that the company provides transportation onto airport tarmacs and security on some of these deportation flights, but they refuse to engage on the risks of these contracted services. ICE records show that GEO has placed its detainees on direct flights to CCOP prison in El Salvador, which UN human rights experts say may constitute enforced disappearances. This is a violation of international conventions that protect all people from enforced disappearances and hold any complicit parties accountable. This raises serious concerns about whether adequate safeguards and oversight are in place. Considering this information, we believe the company has a responsibility to demonstrate transparency and ensure that its practices fully comply with international human rights standards. After we filed our proposal requesting that GEO hire a third party to determine whether they are complicit in violating international human rights law, the company failed to respond to requests from investors for dialogue on this issue. Instead, GEO informed the SEC that it will omit the proposal from their 2026 proxy, taking advantage of the SEC's new policy to concur with all company requests to exclude resolutions, as Josh noted earlier. Filing shareholder resolutions is one of the few formal mechanisms available to investors to voice our concerns, an important act of witness and advocacy. Participating in the proxy voting process is another critical expression of responsible ownership, allowing shareholders to support governance practices that promote sustainability, accountability, human dignity, and respect for human rights. Our task is not merely to prevail in the vote, but to ensure that these matters are spoken, recorded, and set before those who govern. We are called to raise the questions others would leave unasked, and to bring into light what might otherwise remain unseen. So, we will continue to speak for those whose voices are seldom heard. And even when the way is long, the progress slow, and resistance strong, we will not be silent. In our work, who we advocate for is just as important as, if not more important than, who we advocate for. So, who are we advocating for? Our brothers and sisters who are detained or sent back to countries with which they have little or no connection. We advocate for those who have disappeared after being forcibly returned to places they fled due to persecution and violence. Mercy, together with a coalition of investor members from ICCR, will continue to pressure GEO to investigate the human rights risks of the company's involvement in ICE's detention and deportation operations. ICCR members, including Mercy, have engaged many other companies on ICE and immigration besides GEO Group. This year, shareholders have filed resolutions asking for a report on how U.S. immigration policy and enforcement is impacting operations at Walmart, Tyson Foods, Alphabet, and Amazon. As ICE continues to expand its targeted enforcement operations, companies must have an answer when shareholders ask how they are accounting for material risks from losses to workers, customers, and brand reputation. Thank you to the Jesuits and Father Brian Pham for their leadership, and thank you to ICCR for support on these efforts.
Thanks very much, Maxwell. And now to close out our panelist section before we pivot to the Q&A will be Brandon Rees from the AFL-CIO. Over to you, Brandon.
Great. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, ICCR, for the opportunity to share with you today the details of our data privacy shareholder proposal that seeks a report on the sharing of sensitive customer data with third parties, including local law enforcement agencies. This shareholder proposal has been filed by the AFL-CIO at the Lowe's companies and by Zinner Asset Management at Home Depot. We filed these proposals at Home Depot and Lowe's after U.S. Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller directed ICE officials to target immigration raids at hardware stores where day laborers customarily gather in search of work. ICE has raided various Home Depot and Lowe's parking lots as part of President Trump's mass deportation agenda. Now, we were all dismayed by the recent images of President Trump's immigration crackdown in Minneapolis, as well as various Department of Homeland Security raids in Los Angeles, Chicago, and many other cities over the past year. Allegations of racial profiling and the excessive use of force by masked immigration officers has shocked the conscience of Americans across the political spectrum. Now, as shareholders, we are concerned that President Trump's mass deportation agenda is hurting our portfolio companies by instilling fear into employees and customers. It's not good for business when workers are too afraid to go to work or when customers are too afraid to go shopping because they fear being caught up in an immigration dragnet regardless of their immigration status. We're also concerned that companies' data collection and data sharing policies may not be aligned with the data privacy expectations of customers. Both Home Depot and Lowe's collect sensitive personal data about their customers, including race and ethnicity information, as well as geolocation and vehicle license plate data. Their privacy policies state that this information may be shared with law enforcement agencies. And when reading these data privacy policies, the reader is left with the impression that this data is collected and then shared with law enforcement in response to subpoenas, search warrants, or other mandatory requests for data. However, this is not how the automated license plate recognition data is being handled in practice. Various civil rights advocates have raised mass surveillance concerns about retailers partnering with a company called Flock Safety. Flock provides widely used automated license plate reading recognition systems here in the United States. These Flock camera systems capture images of customer vehicle license plates and then use computer vision to record and log this data. And according to media reports, local law enforcement agencies can access vehicle license plate data that is collected at retail store locations through the Flock system. This access is permitted under memorandums of understanding between the retailers and local law enforcement agencies. And according to Flock, it's up to the customers to decide how their data is shared. Now, it's our understanding that while retailers may place prohibitions on the use of license plate data for immigration enforcement purposes, it's up to local law enforcement agencies to abide by these requirements. And this is a concern because there have been various reports of local law enforcement agencies conducting license plate searches on behalf of U.S. Border Patrol and ICE. And while retailers emphasize that they've not entered into any data sharing agreements with federal law enforcement agencies such as ICE, civil rights advocates have also raised concerns about local law enforcement agencies who've entered into what are called 287G agreements with ICE. These agreements effectively deputize local law enforcement agencies to perform immigration enforcement activities on behalf of ICE. And when it comes to data privacy policies and practices, we believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant and that retailers need to be more transparent about how their data sharing agreements are being used by local law enforcement agencies. While the collection of this data may have a legitimate business use, we do not believe that bulk customer data should be voluntarily turned over to law enforcement to be used as part of a mass surveillance system. So for these reasons, we hope that you will support our data privacy shareholder proposal at Lowe's and Home Depot. By publishing the requested data privacy report, these companies can assure their customers and their shareholders that the company has appropriately sought to address these data privacy risks. So thank you for your attention to this important issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up regarding the data privacy shareholder proposals at Lowe's and Home Depot. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brandon, and to all the panelists for a fascinating discussion. Now we're going to pivot to the Q&A. So as a reminder, you should see the question and answer chat box on your Zoom. We have one question in thus far, and I'll also remind you all that please indicate which panelist your question is for so we can make sure this stays focused and precise. This first question we got was not directed to someone, so I'll take the liberty and direct it to Kelly Poole. This question is from Dan Nicolai. Kelly, are Southern Company, Alphabet, and/or Meta engaging with shareholders filing data center related resolutions this year?
Great, thank you. I'll just speak to Southern and then I can pass it to Katie for Meta. But Southern did engage. They were opening to discussing data center issues. And I think the short story about that engagement is that they want to maintain flexibility in how they negotiate contracts with the big data center customers. And instead of putting these large load tariffs in place, but we are seeing that their peers are benefiting from the tariffs, and it hasn't become a restriction in terms of making strong contractual agreements with the data center customers, and it's not derailing the tech companies from coming to their territories.
Thanks so much. Would anybody else like to respond to that?
Sure. Hi. So regarding the Meta proposal, I'm not sure about the status of the Alphabet one. With Meta, we only filed it after trying to engage with the company for the last 2 years to get a dialogue about this topic. Once we filed, we were able to have an initial conversation with the corporate secretary's office. It was a productive dialogue. We shared our concerns and heard sort of their high level response. We did ask for an additional conversation with the subject matter experts in their sustainability team. And we are still waiting for a response from that. Our preference is always dialogue instead of filing proposals. We were really hoping to have an additional conversation with the sustainability team, but that has not yet happened.
Thank you, Katie. Anyone else on the panel would like to address that? We can move on to another question. I'll just note it came through in the chat. Andrea Ranger, I hope I said your first name correctly, noted that Alphabet has not engaged with us on data center, environmental, or climate issues regarding our proposal. The next question we have is from Tim Smith at ICCR. It's directed towards Laura Krausa. Tim says, "Thank you for such an illuminating series of presentations. Josh Zinner in his introduction noted the attacks against shareholder resolutions, including the attacks against shareholder resolutions, including from the White House. Many of us fear that this pressure would dissuade companies from engaging investors who wish to discuss various issues. Laura, you indicated that a number of companies continue meaningful dialogues with proponents and did not automatically seek SEC no objection letters to leave the resolutions off their proxy. Can you describe your experience this year in the dialogues that you've led?"
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to do so. I've been very pleasantly surprised to see that long-term partners that we've worked with have absolutely continued to engage. There's been no hesitation on their parts, and for those that we have not had to file resolutions, we just continue very, very active and engaged dialogue. In fact, I will say that one such partner that has been one that has been more difficult to engage across the years and has been more hesitant, began this year by saying, we intend to lean into shareholder advocacy. We see the value in it. And so they completely changed course. So that was very, very pleasantly surprised. But there are many companies where this has not caused the blip in the works, as it were. And I think PepsiCo and Mondelez also are great examples of that. They dialogued with us multiple times and made very clear, even when they filed the no action requests, they still made very clear to us prior to doing so that they intended to stay in dialogue and that they really wanted to reach withdrawal agreement as much as we did, and that they cared about the issues that we were bringing to their attention. So for CommonSpirit and for our engagement, it's been a really actually very productive year.
Thank you, Laura. Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in here? This is, I think, a pretty widely applicable question.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Our experience at NorthStar, we came into engagements acknowledging the changes that the SEC had made, and most of our proposals have gone to the proxy, and companies have been willing to work with us. So we haven't really noticed that this has dissuaded them or that they've changed kind of their governance practices.
Thank you, Madison. Anyone else on the panel? Okay, great. We'll move on to some of the other questions that have come through. One is from Lewis, and it's for Maxwell. Lewis Malizia from Maxwell. Has Mercy been able to engage with ISS or Glass Lewis about the proposal of GEO or other immigration-related resolutions?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Lewis. For the proposal at GEO, since it's been omitted or excluded from their ballot, we are not engaging with ISS or Glass Lewis since there won't be a vote at their shareholder meeting. But in the past, we have engaged with Glass Lewis and ISS on workers' rights issues. So we will surely seek to do that with some of the other immigration-related proposals that we're co-filing this year, including the one at Home Depot, very similar to what Brandon Rees described at Lowe's. But we hope to have engagement with them successfully as we have in the past. Thanks.
Thank you, Maxwell. Next one was submitted anonymously. We'll direct it to our CEO, Josh Zinner. The question is, how will proponents on this call provide additional information comparable to an exempt solicitation if they were restricted from filing on EDGAR?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Obviously, we were all concerned about the SEC cutting off access to EDGAR, and a number of groups are really trying to push back on that. But in the meantime, it's really, really important for us to be able to collectively as a community to get these exempt solicitations out as widely as possible. So there's a few answers to this. One is that ICCR, on our website, we're putting together a home for exempt solicitations from many of our members and allies, and so that's where they can live. Also sending that out widely through a number of networks, including PRI's collaboration platform, where there's a huge, as people know, a huge number of asset managers and asset owners on that platform who bring a lot of AUM and all are very diligent about their proxy voting. That list of exempt solicitations is also going out to a very, very broad list of asset managers and proxy advisors to make sure that they can see this widely. And so we're trying to make sure that we can get these exempt solicitations out as widely as possible. And we've heard from many asset managers and the proxy advisors that they're going to be looking out for them. So we're encouraging people very strongly to continue to file proxy solicitations, and we'll help folks get those out widely. I understand, and Kelly, I don't know if you want to talk to this, that As You Sow is considering a platform for distributing exempt solicitations, but I know that a number of allies of ours are doing so as well. And so I think as a community, we're trying to get these out as widely as possible in absence of being able to use EDGAR as a distribution network.
Thank you, Josh. Next question is from Salome Testot-Ferry. We're going to direct it to Tim Smith. Tim, have you seen any new anti-ESG players over the past year?
Yes. Can you hear me, Alex? Good. Yes, there have been some new players, both from the conservative side, where we see the Heritage Foundation getting involved, having merged with NCPPR to do their advocacy work. But on the other side, of course, we see some of the traditional leaders like New York State, New York City, many of the groups on this call, well as asset managers and foundations. So there have been a number of those. I don't have a numerical breakdown, but the commitment to advocacy as share owners continues to grow. And then we also have, of course, growing interest in places like Europe, where some major pension funds are actively engaging both managers and companies on issues like climate and human rights and so on. So it continues to be a growing world, even though, of course, the attacks from the conservative side have made some investors a little more cautious about how they get engaged in shareholder action. But this hasn't chilled the process, as we can see from the numbers of these resolutions and the rich dialogues that have resulted from them. Thanks very much.
I just would add one other piece to this, and that, I think, it's no secret that members of the ICCR community have different views on a lot of these issues than some of the anti-ESG filers, but there does seem to be common ground in terms of the desire for the corporate proxy to be available to shareholders of all sizes, and for shareholder democracy and support for the shareholder proposal process. And in fact, Ceres wrote an op-ed along with one of the anti-ESG groups talking about the need to maintain access to the proxy for shareholders of all sizes. And some of the anti-ESG groups wrote a letter after the November announcement to SEC Chair Atkins, raising deep concerns about the SEC shutting off the corporate proxy to smaller shareholders and really to shareholders of all sizes, and what that what that means for corporate accountability. So while we may disagree on many or most of the substantive issues, there's certainly agreement on the need for the SEC to maintain the current system whereby shareholders can file resolutions on the proxy. So interesting common ground there.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Tim. This next question is from Anita Hamilton at Barron's, and it's directed to Madison Krieger. Can you be more specific about the specific data that Salesforce is sharing that puts people at risk of human rights violations? A specific example would be helpful. Sorry if you already have said this in your presentation, but I missed that part. Also, how can I get a copy of your proposal? Thank you.
Hi, Anita. Thanks for your question. So the proposal is published in ICCR's Proxy book. I can also send it to you separately. It'll also be on the company Proxy. And in the proposal, we detail some examples there. So there's plenty of examples that you can look through.
Thank you, Madison. The next question is from Nathan Shugart. We're going to direct it to Tim Smith. Is anyone planning on putting together a central depository showing excluded proposals and the reasons for exclusion? I think CII mentioned potentially doing it, but was curious if anyone else had thought of doing something similar. Thank you, Nathan.
That's a very good question, Nathan. And there has been a vacuum in that space, but we've tried to step into it. There's a section of our ICCR website that lists all of the challenges, the no action letters that companies sent to the SEC, which, as you know, result in a no objection letter, meaning we don't have any problem, go ahead and leave the resolution off the proxy. I think to date, we see about 37 or so challenges to environmental and social resolutions and about 60 on governance issues. Now, to be fair, some of these challenges are based on technical grounds, like a resolution was filed late, that kind of thing. And that's fair. A company should have the right to omit such a resolution. But others we thought were actually stretching it and just using the fact that the SEC would just give a rote free pass by saying no objection. And so there were a number of companies, for example, who challenged a resolution on political spending disclosure. This resolution has been filed for close to 20 years, as hundreds of companies have responded positively and disclosed the information. And suddenly these companies started arguing, oh, this is micromanagement. We can't do it, or we don't wish to do it. So that resulted in one court case, which Josh mentioned earlier. And certainly, I think there will be investor attention spent on companies that are unilaterally omitting resolutions without a very strong basic ground. So you can find the longer list on the ICCR website. And then in addition, I think one participant or one listener indicated earlier, we need to pay attention to the major pension funds, CalPERS and CalSTRS, New York City and New York State, all of whom have indicated concern about this unilateral omission and maybe voting no against certain directors because of it. So that would be one response that we'd see from one sector of the investor community. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So with that, we're at time. So to close us all out today, I'd just like to once again thank all the panelists, thank my colleagues for all the effort that went into today's webinar and in the proxy book more generally. I'd like to remind all the attendees that we'll be circulating both a recording of this webinar and a copy of the proxy book by email later today to everyone who registered for this event. And as always, ICCR's communications team are available to you all, so please feel free to reach out. Thank you again for joining. I wish everybody has a great weekend, and thank you for a wonderful conversation today. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.